My name is Frank Predek. I'm the track chair for today. With us, Carsten, Nadim, and Dawid from HP Fortify, talking about one of the themes of yesterday's keynotes as well, acquiring software and the security touch points in that.
Okay, thanks, Frank. So my name is Carsten Huth. We are all, as Frank said already, with HP Fortify. I'm currently leading the Fortify EMEA Professional Services practice. And
my name is Nadim. I'm part of Carsten's group, part of the professional services group. Basically, we do some code reviews and work with basically our clients to help them with their security programs.
Thank you. Yeah, so my name is Dawid Sroka. I'm also in Carsten's team as a software security consultant since 3 years already.
Yeah, so, with that, thanks again for joining the session and welcome. And so, first of all, maybe quickly about our colleagues from the HP booth. Handed around here some customer survey, so if you don't mind, or if you have some time filling this in. And just one quick remark about that, at the bottom here on the second page, it says statistic application security. So we know that it's supposed to be called static application security. That's a typo that crept in there. So okay. Yeah, runtime. Yeah, that's not bad as well. Oh, have you? Did you print another? Oh, excellent. Okay.
Which comes back. Patching in production is hard.
Yeah. Okay. So just a brief overview of the topics we want to cover today. So, firstly, introduce into the context of this talk, give the problem definition of what we want to talk about, and then focus more on the software development lifecycle and security touch points. And then about Nadim will then talk in more detail about the acquisition process, and then we want to draw some conclusions from this. And just to mention this at the beginning, this was based on some research we did with one of our customers, which is E.ON, which is an quite big energy supplier in different countries in Europe. I think they're headquartered in Germany, and we are working together with them on a security improvement program, and this was one part of that, to develop best practices and recommendations about security touch points when acquiring software. And so this. What we see as the context of this is that today's landscape of software development is a combination of acquiring components through different ways and developing components. And sometimes you have whole solutions that are developed or whole solutions that are acquired. And so there's different types of acquisitions. So there's the commercial off-the-shelf software. There's made to order, so where you basically define your requirements and then outsource or contract the software development. And then, of course, there's parts of solutions that can be open source, and also in some cases software is forced upon companies due to mergers and acquisitions. So they have to use software that was used by another part of the organization, which now becomes part of a new organization, and then obviously also software obtained for free. So then the decision whether to acquire or develop a software should be business driven and a cost benefit decision. So you analyze the cost of developing software versus what the costs are to acquire software on the market, and then draw the decision based on that, what's the best option for the business. So now what we want to focus on in this talk is what should the security touch points be when acquiring software? So from our point of view, that's often a bit overlooked. There's a lot of talk about, a lot of focus on what the security touch points are when developing software, but not so much what the security activities should be when acquiring software. So for that, we looked at the acquisition process and looked at how that matches to the software development lifecycle. And there's some of that runs sort of in parallel, and they are somewhat aligned, but obviously there are also phases in both in both processes that don't have an equivalent in the other part. So we'll look at this in more detail on one of the next couple of slides. And then the acquisition process is part of software assurance, and then that again is part of systems assurance in general. So what we took as a starting point, and I think most of you have probably seen this, the security touch points for developing software from Gary McGraw's book, Building Security Who of you has not seen this before? Okay, so pretty much most of you have seen this. So that's the security touch points postulated by Gary McGraw for developing software, which are code review and architectural risk analysis. So in sort of the earlier phases is risk analysis, then security risk-based security tests, and what we focus a lot on code review and security testing. So that's what we consider as sort of the normal security activities when developing software. So then we looked at this and had a look at how this changes in the context of acquiring software. So which components of this process are more in the responsibility of the acquirer and which are more in the responsibility of the supplier of the software. So some of these, so we move these, basically draw a basic swim lane diagram here and move these boxes according to where we see the responsibility in the acquisition, or well, in the software development lifecycle, to be precise here. So some of it, for example, the coding, the development is in the responsibility of the supplier, and then eliciting the security, the requirements is more the responsibility of the acquirer. And then some of them are somehow shared responsibility. That's why we put them in the middle between those swim lanes here. And then we went a step further and looked at how these activities or phases can be mapped to the acquisition process. So the acquisition process here consists of planning, contracting, monitoring and acceptance, and follow-on. And then when looking at how this maps to the software development lifecycle, there's the first couple of phases are part of the planning phase. Contracting doesn't really have an equivalent in the software development lifecycle. I mean, because it's just the development lifecycle, not the whole software lifecycle. And then monitoring acceptance is, from our point of view, mapped to coding and testing and acceptance. And then feedback from the field is part of follow-on in the acquisition process. So then we went one step further. Oh, and we also aligned here the security activities with this. And then we went another step further and looked at which security activities should be performed in which phases of the acquisition process, and then also added the activities of the acquisition process as such. So here in dark gray, that are the acquisition process activities, and in light gray, the security activities. So that's kind of the first step, to align these two, and then further we looked at again at the security, now at the security activities as part of the software development lifecycle, and what what from our point of view changes if you apply them to the to security touchpoints for acquiring software. So I don't want to go through all of this in detail, but just to pick a few examples. So for example, security requirements when for software made to order is from our point of view fairly similar, because you still, as a acquirer, still need to develop the security requirements. So there's no big difference here. But whereas code review, for example, if you have commercial off-the-shelf software, you normally don't have access to the source code, of course, so you can't do code review yourself. So then one option here would be to consider requesting the supplier to do a code review and share the result with you. So that code review would have to be done by a third party. And so that's one case here. Then another case for code review for made-to-order software is to possibly negotiate during the contracting phase already that you get access to the source code for doing code review. So just to pick a few examples, so we looked at all of these cases and gave our recommendations what, from our point of view, should be done for each of these cases. All right, and with this, I hand over to Nadim to look at the acquisition process in more detail.
Thanks.
Oops, I'm going this way.
Thank you, Carsten. Okay, so as Carsten was saying, I will be taking us through the acquisition process in a little more detail. So if you think back to the previous slide, there were several different components or different pieces. So if I'll just go back quickly to it, what I'll focus on is the part on the bottom here. And just describe those in a little more detail and try to draw out some of the security touch points as we go through those. So of course, the first part, as you can see up on the top here, is the planning phase. And it's really broken up to just a few simple steps. The first being trying to figure out the logistics, deciding what you need, so what you're going to acquire and why you're acquiring it. And then develop specific security requirements for that item or that system that you want to be running. And then, of course, setting out your schedule and your plan to actually acquire that system and ensure that it matches what you wanted to acquire. And then finally, having some kind of criteria to accept this. So we'll go into each of these steps in just slightly more detail. The first is determining your need and figuring out exactly, or putting together a set of goals that you want to achieve and being distinct about them. So you're just trying to gather more context about the application. What is it going to be used for? Is it going to be a web-based application? Is it going to be maybe a batch processing system in the back end? So that context helps you figure out more about the system's layout, so sort of the lay of the land, which then helps you in the next step, which is figuring out your security requirements, which is the next slide. When you're thinking about your security requirements, you want to look at the risk posed by the application or by the system that you're going to be running, which means we need to first figure out what our use cases, and which is what we've possibly done in the previous slide, and then build the abuse cases and think about the security requirements for that system, right? Assessing what kind of assets it's going to be processing, thinking about the adverse conditions that might be opposed or can affect those assets, and figuring out what kind of controls or measures that you want in the system, so sort of your security requirements. Out of this, you would come out with something of maybe a risk rating or a category for this application. Now, depending on the maturity of the organization, you might have a standard or a guideline for what type of requirements to present for a particular project like this one, right? You might go and have this document that says, okay, high-risk applications, you have to think of such and such and such, and if it requires multiple users, it needs to use this type of identity management framework, for instance. So those might be requirements that you're going to already have, but potentially won't have that particular standard or benchmarking to go back to, so you might have to build your own requirements, which you will in either case, right? Because you want to have specific controls and measures that address the particular threats of your system, right? So eventually you're going to have to build requirements specific to that system. And therefore you will go through a bunch of known methods of gathering requirements, right? So it's just a gathering information, requirements gathering process. One of the ways that we found a lot of customers or a lot of groups will use is the square method. Now this is a method developed by a research group in Carnegie Mellon. It's a 9-step process, and this is a sample of it. I won't go into detail with the process itself, but it's something that you might want to look up. I believe the next slide we have a source for you to go check it out. But the nice folks that created this process, they've also created a modified process for the acquisition. So if you're building requirements for an acquisition, for software that you're acquiring. Additionally, they've made a tool, a web-based tool that you can use to gather the requirements and maybe build some more artifacts on that. What are those artifacts that you might need? Possibly an assurance case. So can anybody quickly tell me what an assurance case is, or is that something that rings a bell? So it's sort of like proof that a particular assurance or a particular case is handled, right? It assures you that we don't have cross-site scriptings, which is pretty difficult, right? But at least if you provide me with a security report or a static analysis report or a pen test report, it might give me some kind of confidence that you might not have those types of issues in your code. So it's a slight guarantee. It wouldn't be a complete guarantee, but it's some sort of evidence. So that would be part of the requirements gathering phase, is that you think about, well, how do I ensure that these requirements have been fulfilled, right? Like an evaluation criteria. Now, once you've figured out, of course, the security category and what kind of requirements you want to give the suppliers, you have to also consider your situation from a risk perspective. If you've identified risks, how are you going to handle them? And depending on the type of software that you've chosen to go with, so if it's a COTS program or a custom-made program, you might have different ways of managing or dealing with a risk. And then there might be trade-offs with each strategy that you take. Okay, so and then the next step here is just to actually plan the acquisition process. Now, a lot of this is just generic stuff that you will have to run through whether you're thinking about security or not. But the ones in blue are mainly the ones that you want to map back to your security touchpoints. So the second one here is allowing time for security testing and thinking about security testing while you're planning for the acquisition. The other point is to not just accept any kind of guarantee or any kind of assurance, but rather try to get a customized assurance, maybe like demand particular testing for the application within the context that you want to run it in, right? So possibly in your own QA environment, right? Running your own configuration of it, because it might be a different one than the ones that they've already tested it or certified it for. And then naturally the next step would be to create the request for proposals, to identify what you want your suppliers to provide you with, so what kind of certifications or qualifications you want them to furnish. Basically set expectations to your suppliers, right? Now that sort of concludes the first part of the process, which was the planning phase. Now we look at the contracting phase, which is that second step. In this step, you look at, well, you basically issue the RFPs, you gather the responses, you evaluate the responses, and you basically decide on who's going to provide you with the software or the system or build it for you or whatever you've decided to do. Important things to think about is that to ensure that your RFP clearly states what work you expect them to do, which means having the proper requirements in there and ensuring your suppliers understand them. Setting terms and conditions, so things like, is it going to be tested, what kind of tests we need you to provide, and evidence and so on. Maybe some certifications, and possibly even a pre-qualification test. You want to involve subject matter experts, so people who know or maybe have worked on similar projects, and they can guide you through the different aspects of acquiring similar software. Some of the tools that are available to you are on Build Security In website. They have a due diligence questionnaire, which helps you, depending on the type of the software that you're acquiring, gives you a set of security concerns to address with the questions that go with those concerns. So on this next slide, those are actually the set of concerns that they try to bring up. So an example would be, what is the company's security track record? Are they known for software that has had a lot of vulnerabilities? What is their timeliness in mitigating these vulnerabilities? Do they come around quick when there's a 0 day? How about their developers? Do they provide them with the necessary tools and awareness to write secure and defensive code, right? So lots of points to consider. You would definitely not do this for all your suppliers. You would probably do it just for the shortlisted suppliers. So have them fill out those questionnaires or the sections that you deem relevant for you, and then use that to select the winner, right? This is, so if I go back to these concerns, these are sort of the descriptions. They give you an idea of why you're looking at that concern. So an example might be an individual malicious behavior, so possibly a rogue developer introducing a backdoor into your code. That might be a risk, right? That might be a risk that if you're developing, might take place, or if even your supplier is developing, they might have the same issue. And then the questions you would ask would roam around, how do you control your source code? Do you have code reviews, peer reviews, and so on, right? And so on. So I won't go through each one of them because I think we're running out of time quickly. So since we're in the contracting phase now, we've gotten the RFPs, we've gotten the proposals, we've reviewed them, we've decided which ones make the grade, and we start to contract with that supplier. Some of the touch points you want to consider include things like ensuring the vendor will provide you with the proper documentation. So once the system is running, you want to be able to operate it. You want to keep it secure as it's running. So some terms in guaranteeing that this will happen. You want them to, again, like we just mentioned, you want them to fix 0 days and things that suddenly appear in the field, right? When you're running it and something breaks, you want to make sure that they have your back at that time. Possibly, so like Carsten had mentioned, having access to the source code so you can perform your own validation of the deliverables, right? And possibly allowing them to give you, to be willing, to ask them to be willing to support you if you're modifying the code, if you want to change it, or if you need to add more use cases in the future, right? That depends on how long you imagine that software is going to be running, and if you have a migration plan in the future, again, you might want to involve them or have some kind of terms to keep them at your side at that time. One good example is actually on the OWASP website. So there is an annex for a contract. You wouldn't copy and paste it, but you would use it to talk with legal and develop a contract that basically covers you while acquiring software. And with this, I hand it over to Dawid, who's going to take us through the next part of the acquisition process.
Thank you, Nadim. Yes, so I'll cover the last two phases of the acquisition process, starting with monitoring and acceptance. So the contract is in place. The software is probably being developed right now, so we have to monitor the progress of the development. For that, we establish a work schedule to make sure, things are getting done on time and there are reports being provided periodically. We also implement some change control and review and eventually accept the deliverables. So, as I mentioned, schedule should include specific dates, a timeline for meeting the requirements which have been established for security. And change control would then ensure that the requirements are actually not compromised whenever a change is introduced into the system, the software being developed. So, and when there are deliverables, not only the software, the application that has been contracted, it's also the documentation and the test cases which have been done and the results of running those tests. And eventually you have to, when you want to accept such deliverables, you have to make sure the criteria for doing that are pretty explicit and measurable. So you can clearly say, yeah, this is something I'm willing to accept. And they're included in the contract, in the terms and conditions of the contract. So there's an example of acceptance criteria with a lot of shall and shall not about the functionality of the software when in a certain configuration of operating system middleware. And there's also information that should not be, in this example at least, the supplier should not modify any configuration settings when there is an update, so part of the change control, unless it's authorized by the acquirer. And the subject matter experts should review the deliverables and look at the test results which have been provided by the supplier. And the tests can also be done by third-party testers, and they probably should include both static testing and dynamic analysis or penetration testing. So if the testing is done by a third party, there's another round for choosing such a supplier for security testing. And the criteria for the decision, which one should do that testing, is based on the following facts. I mean, you have to look at the reputation in the industry, which methods are will be used to test the software, the references. If there has been tests done already, I mean, should probably be from the industry you are working in, and the software should be, the types of software should match. So if this third party tester has an experience in testing back-end systems, and probably you wouldn't like to have them test your web application, web front end. Yeah, and as I mentioned, the common services would be provided by such a supplier would be static code analysis, static application security testing, dynamic testing, and penetration, and then also security architecture and design review. So the last phase of the acquisition process is the follow-on. So maintenance of the software is already been deployed, and eventually the decommissioning of the software. So talking about maintaining the software, right, you have to think about patches and prepare for the long run, depending how long the software is supposed to be used. Because changes in the software, so software updates, configuration changes, the application, the OS updates, for example, may invalidate your assumptions. An example of this would be if the security requirements state that secure communication should be used over SSL version 1 or 2, or maybe even 3. So it was 10 years ago, pretty perfectly fine. Nowadays, we know from the that this is no longer secure. We have to kind of adjust to the use and switch to the TLS secure communication. So whenever upgrade and patches support, if this is also has been contractually established, is an important part of the maintenance phase of the acquisition process. So that will be covered by the SLA terms. What happens when there is a critical issue found in the field? What with the reaction time of the supplier to provide a patch and so on. Finally, you have to dispose of the software, right? It has end of life, the stage, 5, 10 years perhaps. So software has to be, probably is not so important, the software as much as the data which it has. So you have to decide if it's supposed to be migrated to the new system and then eventually destroyed or maybe archived if such are the compliance requirements. So for recap of the presentation, the decision of whether to acquire or develop a software and application on your own, it's a business-driven decision based on a cost-benefit analysis. And when you're acquiring, you have to think about the business criteria. This is quite normal, of course, functionality, performance, stability, but also about the security criteria. And in this presentation, we have outlined the touch points that there's pretty good match between the touch points can be applied to the acquisition process, just as they're normally applied to the software development life cycle, and highlighting where this security touch points can be applied exactly. There is, the phases of the acquisition that we have highlighted will be the planning, contracting, monitoring, acceptance, and eventually follow-on. And for each of the phases, the contract is the key component, is the key document that should cover at least from even up to the follow-on to the maintenance of the software, to ensure that the supplier, the vendor of the software is committed to it. Concluding the presentation, it's important to apply the touch points to building to build secure software to the acquisition process. Once again, use a risk-driven approach when selecting suppliers, so questionnaires, as Nadim mentioned, and both for off-the-shelf software, commercial off-the-shelf software, and also for custom made to order. And security testing require, of course, recommended to do both static and dynamic analysis to make, and the test reports should not only be provided at the end of the development, but also periodically to make sure there is a progress, to identify quickly any problems that may ensue. And finally, to introduce security focus terms and conditions into the contract for the acquisition. That's an important part, and it should be not only as an annex, as in the OWASP example, it should be integral part of the acquisition contract. Just a brief mention. What have we done actually to develop this topic? There were fragments of like the square methodology for creating security requirements. We have kind of put it all together. There was no best practice for the whole process. we have seen that there are overlaps between the development and the acquisition process regarding security, and we are hoping to build a gauge system that can easily help us identify aspects to consider for the different system development scenarios, if it's commercial, if it's open source perhaps, or just downloaded for free, or made to order. The sources for your reference, and that will be it. Any questions?
Yeah, thank you. Are there any audience questions? Okay. Because of a shortage of mics, I'll shout it out and then we'll repeat it for the camera.
Do you see a trend of businesses developing the software with third parties rather than themselves?
So the question was if we see a trend in that companies acquire software rather develop it themselves, just like Frank said, repeating the question. Well, I mean, we see that there's more of a mix nowadays where some components are acquired and other components are developed yourself. So you hardly have a scenario, I think, where everything, well, unless, I mean, in some cases you acquire everything, but then even if you develop the software, there's often components that are part of, that are acquired, like, I mean, whatever it might be, enterprise service bus technology, some communication, other communication technology, business modules linking into another via web services into another system and so on, acquiring services. So, and then part of this I think also applies to components. I mean, you probably wouldn't use the whole, depending on the size and of the components you want to integrate, you wouldn't probably use everything of this unless you have really sort of an RFP process and so on, but parts of that, it's always worth looking at it and considering the what Nadim mentioned, the things that to be aware of and to consider what should be looked at, what should be the security requirements for component you integrate. So yeah, trend, I think a trend is more, from my point of view, more that there's a mix, more often a mix of both. Do you think anything to add?
I agree.
Excellent. Okay. More questions? I think you had, oh yeah, there's another question there. Okay. Yeah. So again, to summarize the question, so the question is if you have, if you acquire a company which has been a startup, they often don't have such a rigorous security process as kind of the bigger companies that acquires a smaller company, and how what we would say about reconciling that kind of gap in the maturity of a security process. So, I mean, firstly, what I would say is that what we are talking here about mainly was about acquiring software, not... Yeah, no, yeah, I mean, so what we were focusing on mainly is about acquiring software, not a whole company, but that's part of it. But the security processes of the acquired company, well, I mean, if you have the bigger company that has more mature, I think it's has more mature security process. I think it's well, actually, we have kind of been in a similar situation as we are. Yeah, as HP45. I mean, some of us were already at HP45 at the time when we were acquired by HP. So it's sort of a transition period. You can't do it in one day. So you have to do it step by step, and also risk-driven. Take a risk-driven approach to mature the security processes. Yeah, so
I think also, if you go back to the first slide, the, what was it called? We said the forced upon. That's usually what the case will be, is that the bigger company or the acquiring company will force upon the smaller company their practices and possibly their software. So possibly if they have old software that's running, that'll be chucked out over time, and you'll just go with whatever the bigger company is doing. But as Carsten says, of course, if there's a special need, they might try to plan out some kind of integration.
Okay. They are available for questions over email. If you're leaving the room, please remember the system. You know the drill by now. Green means yay. Red means get out of here. Don't let them see it. You drop in a red card. And thank you for your attention.